We're looking at the headlines on all of this. Fury as Rwanda flight blocked, says the Daily Express, and that's repeated across many of the newspapers. Guardian saying European ruling throws Rwanda plan into chaos. Well, let's now talk to two people about this. We've got Antonia Torr, who's head of immigration services at her legal firm Howard Kennedy, and also we've got Conservative Minister Brendan Clark-Smith on this as well. So, but before all of that...
Well, let's go to our national reporter, actually, Paul Hawkins, who's outside the Home Office this morning for us. And, Paul, look, the latest move coming from the European Court of Human Rights, the ball now in the court of the Home Office. What happens next?
Well, that's the key question, isn't it? And just to be clear about this, and we can't emphasise this enough, the European Court of Human Rights is nothing to do with the EU. Effectively, Britain's been a member of the Council of Europe. That was set up after the Second World War. They then put into place the European Convention on Human Rights. It was a kind of treaty that everyone signed up to. And then the European Court of Human Rights is there to enforce that convention, and that was where the ruling came from in Strasbourg last night. Very interesting about what the government's move is next. The Human Rights Act, that was brought in 1998. That effectively means that British laws are answerable to the European Convention on Human Rights. So before 1998, if you felt that your human rights were being infringed, you went to Strasbourg, you went to the European Court of Human Rights. After 1998, you could go to British courts and have it enforced there. So the government, it would seem to indicate, and Boris Johnson alluded to this tomorrow before that flight was grounded, that there would have to be a change in legislation to the Human Rights Act. And if we actually go and look back at the Conservative manifesto from a few years ago, this is in 2019, it said on page 48, there is a commitment to update the Human Rights Act. So it would mean legal interventions are not abused to conduct politics by another means or to create needless delay. So in the next few days, expect to hear some noises from the government on how it is going to loosen the Human Rights Act so it complies with the European Convention on Human Rights when it comes to this policy.
We leave Paul, we go to Boscombe Down now, where the aircraft was supposed to take off from last night. Our reporter, Jeff Moody, is there. Is the plane still there, Jeff?
No, the plane's gone. It was just behind me last night, just almost taxiing to the runway. I mean, we watched as everybody got on board. We saw the catering trucks get on board. We then saw the asylum seekers themselves get on board. The lights were all on the runway. The engine was running. It was all set to go. And then, right at the last minute, we heard that the remaining migrants had gone to the Court of Human Rights and the European Court of Human Rights, and had been told that they could wait until the judicial review, which doesn't take place until next month. So suddenly the whole thing was off. Priti Patel, as we were hearing, is determined that it is going to continue, that it is going to work. She said that although it's very disappointing that the plane didn't take off yesterday, work now begins this morning on that next plane, and you can bet that they're going to be determined that the next plane will take off without a hitch. I mean, it is a major hitch. It's definitely a blow for the government that a foreign judge in a foreign land has ruled against British courts to make this decision and to go against government policy. So it's definitely a sting in the tail, but hopefully the next flight will be very shortly.
OK, Jeff, leave it there. Thanks for the update. Really appreciate it. So I want to bring in Antonia Torr on this one now. Antonia, as a lawyer, and you're against this flight, and so therefore you'd be for this European Court of Human Rights interjection here. Guardian says that their ruling throws the government's Rwanda plan into chaos. Would you agree with that?
I think it definitely causes the government to reassess and revisit their policy and their strategy. It's important to bear in mind that what the European Court has done has basically put a stay on the policy until the judicial review, which is in about a month's time. The UK courts were effectively saying, we're not going to comment on whether the policy is lawful or not. That is for the hearing in July. But in the interim, the Secretary of State can continue. And if it was ruled that the policy was unlawful, those who were removed to Rwanda could be returned back to the UK. what the European Court of Human Rights have basically done is short-circuited that a little bit to say, well, no, let's have that discussion first before we put people on a plane.
OK, well, let's bring in Brendan Clark-Smith, Conservative MP, who's also in the studio to this debate this morning. There will be lots of people listening to this, and irrespective of their views on this policy, will think, how can it be that something has been approved by the British courts, by Lord Justice Singh, no less, at the Supreme Court this week, and then at the 11th hour blocked by the ECHR when we're no longer in the European Union? People will say, who's running this country?
Absolutely, and it's about taking back control. And as we've said, it's been through 3 British courts already. It's been to the High Court, the Court of Appeal, the Supreme Court, which doesn't seem to be very supreme at the moment, of course. But the government haven't lost the case here, as Antonio was saying. You know, this is a stay on this. The government could still be successful. We could still have it found in the government's favour. But it is very frustrating. It wastes a lot of money. It wastes a lot of time. And at the end of the day, you know, the government have put this, what I think is a watertight piece of legislation through there, and I'm confident they're still going to succeed in the end.
So why are we still in the ECHR?
Well, I think if you go back in time a little bit and you look at the convention that came in after the Second World War, there's a lot of very reasonable stuff there. So freedom of expression, right to a fair trial, and the kind of things that everyone really can agree with. But then since 1998, the Blair administration brought in the Human Rights Act, of course, and it actually put this into British law. Really, we feel it's been kind of gold-plated by this kind of left-leaning woke judges, so to speak. And really, this is what the problem is. It's not so much the principles, but it's gone off in a completely different direction. So we want to take back control.
Would you take Britain out of that agreement? I mean, if you were cabinet minister, would you be lobbying that we cut to the European Court of Human Rights adrift?
I think this is the debate that we need to have. I mean, certainly it needs updating, I think, at the very least. We said about British courts deciding it. It doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bathwater and, you know, we're very proud of
You can't pick and choose which of their decisions that you like or you don't like.
We can't, but when we make our own laws, I think that's the point, is that we can actually stick to those as well.
Why didn't you just tell them to go swing? You know, just why did we listen to them last night? Why didn't the plane just take off?
Well, that has actually happened in some countries where they ignore the rulings and just get on with it. But I think we do it the right way in this country. We do actually go through the full legal processes, and I would rather that we did that than we just ignore the law.
Antonio, I'd love you to explain. I do explain to you, you're in favour of this intervention and you totally understand it and you get it. Now, here's one viewer, Patricia. I voted for Brexit. I was sick of the EU running the show. Here we are now. The tail is still wagging the dog. Why on earth are the European courts having a final say over our legal system, which Brendan alluded to there as well? How can we as a country possibly move forward if they keep getting in the way? So it is complicated. People thought they voted for one thing with Brexit. They thought, well, goodbye to all that European interference. Not necessarily so.
The European Court of Human Rights is very separate from the European Union. It's a separate legal agreement that we've signed up to. The Conservative government, as one of your reporters has already mentioned, had it in their manifesto to update the Human Rights Act so that perhaps those references and interventions wouldn't happen. They failed to do that, so it's really the government's own fault that they find them in this position.
Let's talk about this judicial review that's due to take place in July, because all of this may happen and, you know, a handful of illegal immigrants may find themselves in Kigali in the next few weeks. It's probable, it's possible. Mm-hmm. The judicial review, how long is that likely to take? And, you know, obviously you haven't got an impartial position, but do you suspect that this policy may be thrown out?
So with the judicial review, the important thing to bear in mind is that the review is looking at the policy as a whole. So all in all, it's quite a generic assessment. You know, do we agree with the policy? Do we think the Secretary of State has got the right procedures in place for this policy to meet her legal obligations? That's quite a high threshold to assess, which is why the earlier attempts have been unsuccessful in the High Court and the Court of Appeal. But the individual circumstances, when looked at on an individual basis, they have been successful because you're not talking about it in generic terms. So I wouldn't be surprised if this policy was found to be lawful following some amendments or restrictions by the judges in the judicial review, because that's the nature of what that court case would look at.
Brendan Clark-Smith, I do think there's a really interesting element to this whole scenario that we find ourselves in when there's this unelected voice interfering in this. I mean, at the end of the day, the government have been elected on a mandate of trying to control immigration. You've got interventions from bishops who aren't elected. You've got interventions from Prince of Wales, who's unelected. You've got interventions from the European Court of Human Rights, who are unelected. People will say, is this a democratic country?
Absolutely, and it's about accountability, and this is why I think a lot of people at home will be very frustrated that, of course, the plane didn't take off. I think there was an argument over how many people were going to be on the plane, and for me it was very important that at least 1 or 2 people were, because it's the principle. It shows you've got over the line, and you can talk about maybe having more people on the plane later. The fact that nobody's actually got on it in the end shows that there are still some battles I think we need to win.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.